Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes Podcast. The podcast, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors, and that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops, and also brought to you by Master Packager, an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Ars Technica has reported that a critical SharePoint vulnerability is under active exploitation globally. The flaws in question that are being leveraged are CVE-2025-53770, which is a remote code execution vulnerability, and CVE-2025-53771, which is a spoofing vulnerability. And these were partially patched during the July patch Tuesday, but only really fully remediated by an emergency patch that was released on July 19th. This affects the on-prem products of SharePoint, SharePoint Server 2016, SharePoint Server 2019, as well as SharePoint Server Subscription Edition. However, SharePoint Online is not affected, which I would imagine is probably the bulk of the customers would be using that SharePoint Online is my guess. These flaws allow attackers to exploit deserialization vulnerabilities to gain unauthenticated remote code execution, escalate privileges, and potentially maintain persistent access. Action items for administrators includes obviously immediately apply the July 19th emergency patch because this is being actively exploited, and it is being actively exploited very effectively too. There's many victims. But then also you should audit your systems for persistence mechanisms, such as web shells, as patching alone does not remove those existing web shells. The US CISA has also flagged this in their KEV catalog, warning that the vulnerabilities are being exploited in the wild, including reported attacks on US energy, education, and government sectors. Rather worryingly, one of the victims is reportedly the US National Nuclear Security Agency, but there's also been the U.S. Education Department, Florida's Department of Revenue, and the Rhode Island General Assembly, amongst many other victims already reported. So if you're using any of these SharePoint products, get on top of this quickly. According to bleepycomputer.com, recent Windows update KB5062557 is causing serious problems in Windows Server environments that run failover clustering and the Hyper-V feature, specifically those with the features installed on Windows Server versions 2016, 2019, and 2022. Reported issues include VMs failing to start and receiving BitLocker prompts, as well as cluster services terminating and restarting. Microsoft has acknowledged the issue and is investigating. However, no official workaround or hotfix has been released yet. Customers impacted are simply instructed to reach out to business support. Cybersecuritynews.com recently highlighted a serious flaw in Microsoft's Entra ID that allows attackers to escalate privileges to the global administrator role under certain conditions. Security researchers at Datadog discovered that service principals assigned the Cloud Application Administrator role, or Application Administrator role, or Application.readWrite.all permission can escalate their privileges by hijacking the built-in Office 365 Exchange Online service principal. The vulnerability works by exploiting the Office 365 Exchange Online service principal domain.readWrite.all permission to add a new federated domain to the tenant. Attackers can then forge SAML tokens as any hybrid tenant user synchronized between on-premises and Entra ID, including users with global administrator privileges. Microsoft's response has emphasized that the scenario reflects misconfiguration rather than a security bypass, stating that application administrator roles inherently include the ability to manage application credentials and impersonate application identities. So this one seems like a case of, hey, buyer beware, this isn't something that we've done wrong, this is something that you've done wrong. Now, this has happened in the past with other vulnerabilities, or let's say blind spots in terms of security, and Microsoft eventually did kind of pivot and harden the security and remove the threat. It looks like, at least so far, that's not going to happen in this instance. So yeah, kind of buyer beware on this one. Forbes has reported that Microsoft has formally apologized for confusion caused by the error introduced with the June Windows updates that was flagging an issue with the advanced Windows firewall. This is something I covered on the last couple of episodes of the podcast, I believe. The issue essentially triggered event ID errors, but Microsoft then said, hey, this is basically an erroneous error, ironically, and that they could be safely ignored, and it was related to an upcoming product, so you could just kind of safely ignore it. There were then mixed reports on whether or not the July Windows updates actually clear the event errors as Microsoft had originally claimed. But regardless, it seems like if you're still facing those event errors, they can be ignored. And Microsoft has apologized. In a quick update to a story I've covered on the last few episodes of the podcast, bleepycomputer.com has reported that the US CISA has stated that Citrix Bleed 2, which is tracked as CVE-2025-31036, is now being actively exploited, which is something that has been reported by security researchers for weeks now. The CISA has added it to the Kev catalog, giving U.S. federal agencies just 24 hours to apply their mitigations, and that 24 hours has well passed by the time of recording this episode. This urgency underscores the real-world risk and the fact that, as usual, these Citrix components, they're kind of low-hanging fruit because they're sitting on that edge. They provide remote access solutions. So it is a pretty high-value target for these cyber gangs. The Record Media and Ars Technica both reported that Google's Threat Analysis Group has discovered attackers deploying a custom-built backdoor on SonicWall devices, specifically the SMA 100 series network devices. Attackers leveraged known vulnerabilities, likely CVE-2021-20038 or CVE-2021-20045 to breach systems and implant persistent malware. The recommended actions here are to patch to the latest firmware, audit your SonicWall appliances for unauthorized admin users or suspicious processes, isolate exposed devices until full scans and rebuilds can be completed, and consider replacing devices that cannot be validated as clean. The Google Threat Analysis Group did not attribute the campaign to specific actors at the moment, but noted that the techniques were sophisticated and likely targeted at high-value networks. BleepyComputer.com recently reported that Ring, the makers of the very popular doorbell cameras, is under scrutiny after users reported suspicious logins from unknown IPs and devices. Now, I can confirm that they face scrutiny because my social media timeline a few days ago was full of people putting out tips on checking the Ring app to see if unknown devices accessed their cameras. Now, for their part, Ring has denied a breach, instead attributing to the Ring Control Center displaying information inaccurately, which that's still a pretty big boo-boo. Yeah, it's not as bad as having actual unauthorized sources viewing your camera. But I mean, displaying potentially real IP addresses or real people or even other Ring users' information into other people's Ring apps, like just general customers, seems like a pretty bad violation. But I guess we're going to have to see as more information becomes available. Investors.com has reported that Goldman Sachs has initiated Nutanix stock with a buy rating, citing strong momentum in hybrid and multi-cloud markets. Goldman Sachs analyst Matthew Martino set a price target of 95 for Nutanix stock. He called the company, quote, a key modernization play for enterprises navigating legacy infrastructure transitions, end quote. Clearly, analysts believe Nutanix is well-positioned to capture workloads moving off of VMware and to offer simplified infrastructure across public and private cloud environments, which is not a huge surprise. You kind of have to read between the lines of that statement, like legacy infrastructure transitions. It seems like kind of poking the bear a little bit without being too obvious about it. But yeah, it seems like Nutanix is in a great position currently. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops going forward with so many customers feeling the disruption of these private equity firm acquisitions of some of the pillars of enterprise technology. Microsoft has announced that their connected cache feature is now generally available. And if you're not aware of it, connected cache helps organizations realize significant bandwidth savings when performing Windows 11 upgrades, Microsoft Intune provisioning, Intune application installations, Windows Autopilot software updates, and other monthly update deployments. Microsoft's Connected Cache for Enterprise and Education is available to all organizations with Windows Enterprise E3, E5, and F3, or Windows Education A3 and A5 entitlements, or a more comprehensive Microsoft 365 subscription. Eligible organizations can deploy Connected Cache nodes directly to host machines running Windows Server, Windows Desktop, and Linux devices such as Ubuntu and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And it looks like for at least Windows, Microsoft has made a Windows installer or MSI installer available to make that setup simple. One of the standout benefits of Connected Cache is apparently its remarkable flexibility. It could be deployed on almost any platform within your existing infrastructure, as stated, and its versatility ensures that organizations of all sizes and architectures can take advantage of its features without the need for significant hardware changes or investments. Connected Cache works efficiently by caching only the content specifically requested by devices on your organization's network, eliminating unnecessary storage use and reducing redundant downloads. As a result, bandwidth consumption is decreased and users benefit from faster, more reliable access to updates and applications. So something that has been sorely needed for Intune since its inception, which is many years now, has been improvements in terms of speed for managing and deploying applications. So hopefully this provides an option to possibly store the applications on like local sources and speed up the deployments. That remains to be seen if that is going to be the case. And for some organizations, it might seem like a step back because they'll have to manage infrastructure for the applications again and possibly have an equivalent of distribution points on premises when using Intune, which might defeat some of the point, but it's better than slow deployments and provisioning, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see how well this works and what the adoption rate will be like. Once again, bleepycomputer.com reported that the UK government plans to ban all public sector organizations from paying ransoms to cyber criminals. The goal is to cut off the financial incentives for these attackers. No implementation timeline has yet been confirmed, but if passed, I believe this will be a pretty good move. I also saw that the UK is considering implementing an age assurance or verification for certain websites. And I also saw this week that Twitter, or X, has gone afoul of Irish regulators for displaying content to underage sources, inappropriate content, as you can imagine, without any real safety rails for that. So, yeah, it seems like, at least on this side of the pond, regulators are moving in directions to potentially tackle more of the technology blind spots that are out there. Win11 has reported that the European Commission is exploring a major funding initiative to address what it calls a silent crisis in open source software security following a report by GitHub. The silent crisis is that widely used critical open source software currently relies on unpaid volunteers to contribute to them, meaning many people are depending on the kindness of these volunteers, and these volunteers, of course, can kind of burn out, become disillusioned, and stop contributing. GitHub envisions that the EU would focus on identifying critical dependencies and then invest to ensure continued maintenance, security improvements, and the strengthening of the broader OSS ecosystem. If you're wondering how much all this would cost, GitHub proposes a minimum budget of 350 million euros from the block's upcoming multi-year budget. The GitHub study outlined some of the crucial design criteria for this fund. suggesting there should be pooled financing, industry, national governments, and the EU contributing to a single fund, low bureaucracy, simple application processes, and minimal reporting for maintainers, political independence, avoiding shifting priorities based on political trends, focus on foundational tech as well. Flexible funding, supporting individuals, nonprofits, and companies regardless of EU residency, as long as the work benefits the EU. A community focus, collaboration with open source community to define priorities, and strategic alignment, demonstrating positive impact on EU strategic goals. This fund would not be for every open source project out there. It would be for widely used components that lack dedicated funding so that they can receive ongoing maintenance and security. This is now all still under discussion, but it signals increased attention from policymakers on open source as national infrastructure. A few weeks ago, Apple announced Apple Containers on macOS, an open source containerization framework for creating and running Linux container images on Macs. The technology utilizes the Swift programming language that's optimized for Apple's silicon chips and that minimizes security risks. Apple containers essentially provide a lightweight VM per container that features a limited file system to provide that added security. The newstack.io published a comparison of Apple containers and Docker for anyone who would like to learn more. I find it interesting that Apple is kind of making this move. It makes sense in some regards. I mean, if you were to compare applications on Mac versus Windows, you think, well, applications on Mac are kind of already containerized, but I don't know if you've used Macs, but if you look at how applications have seemingly gone on Mac, they seem to be becoming a little less containerized. There's a lot more junk being written outside of the application itself, so maybe this is a good idea to rein that in. Also, of course, containers, the beauty of them is consistency for application performance, that added security, and more. Ars Technica has reported on a study by researchers at Model Evaluation and Threat Research showing that AI-assisted coding actually made developers slower by about 19% on open source projects. Researchers found that developers using AI tools spent more time verifying suggestions. Complex tasks like security fixes were slower with AI than manual coding, and the overall output quality wasn't significantly higher. The study challenges the hype around GenAI tools and suggests that blindly integrating AI into workflows may actually hinder rather than help in high-stakes coding environments. This also comes at a time when I saw that Ars Technica reported that in a 10-hour coding marathon recently, a human defeated ChatGPT. So while there's a lot of shine on GenAI, really when push comes to shove, humans are still ahead of it. Show sponsor Master Packager just released Master Packager version 25.5.9335. And with this version comes the ability to add predefined custom actions to install and uninstall drivers. And they've shared a good comprehensive blog post on how you can use that feature. And I'll try to share a link with the announcement that contains that link with this episode of the podcast, which is episode 396. And you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com. But also in this release, in Master Packager Toolbox, they've added support for creating and extracting WIM files. They've upgraded the UI framework from WPF to WinUI 3. They've added support to read Intune app categories from PSADT projects saved by Master Wrapper. And speaking of Master Wrapper, over there, they've added support to set Intune app categories and more. For a full list of what has been added in this release, again, check out the link that I'll share with this episode, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com. TheRegister.com recently reported that both ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot lost a chess match against a 40-year-old Atari 800 system running a basic chess engine. Meanwhile, Google Gemini outright refused to play, citing terms of service restrictions and safety guidelines. This further highlights current limitations of general-purpose AI tools when confronted with the legacy software or rigid rule-based challenges. It also underscores how today's intelligence systems still struggle in structured domains without specific tuning and explicit parameters, perhaps like you might find with agentic AI that's fine-tuned for just specific tasks, I guess. Gizmodo has reported that OpenAI is developing a ChatGPT agent that would request system-level permissions, a little similar to Microsoft's recall feature. The agent would be able to navigate the file system, potentially open and operate applications, and interact with the browser tabs and saved content. So personally, I feel like it's actually a wise next step because you can use ChatGPT on a schedule already, but obviously it's going to be limited to what it can currently do. But if you are allowed access to your system and potentially manipulate applications, it could potentially do pretty much any task that you could potentially think about automating. So that would be kind of interesting. It does raise serious privacy and security concerns, however, particularly for enterprise users. And according to OpenAI, the goal is to enable productivity automation, but critics argue the attack surface and potential abuse make it a risky step. If such capabilities do go live, expect tight scrutiny from IT governance teams and likely new policies around AI agent permissions in enterprises. And of course, I'm sure the security researchers and InfoSec people of the world will be up in arms just like they were about Microsoft Recall. Finally, in the news for this week, PC World has reported that Microsoft is introducing some new AI tools in Windows 11. They're introducing semantic and agentic search within the settings menu. And with the semantic search, they say users can describe what they're looking for using natural language, and the system will understand and perform tasks accordingly. And with the agentic features, the setting menu now includes an agent that can perform tasks like changing display resolution or guide users to complete them. They'll also bring a click to do feature that allows context-aware actions on selected text, such as reading aloud, practicing with Reading Coach, or generating drafts with Copilot. There will also be further updates to Paint, which has kind of been not the marquee piece of some of the AI announcements, but maybe the easiest to demonstrate, so it got a lot of attention when some of the Copilot announcements were first announced. But Paint will now include AI-generated stickers and an object select tool for editing images, so maybe not as revolutionary as some of the previous features. They've also announced some updates or improvements for Photos and Snipping tool, with new features like Relight for adding lighting effects to photos, and a perfect screenshot tool and Snipping tool using AI, which sounds a little bit interesting. Snipping tool is very, very useful as it is, so I'd be interested to see if AI further makes it a go-to on Windows. But now, this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up this week, Jan shared his comprehensive blog post once again on identifying signs of compromise in your Citrix environment. So this blog post is not new, but I think it's being kept up to date, and it's more topical than ever because, as I reported, Citrix Bleed 2 has been at the forefront the last few weeks in terms of major InfoSec stories, so this is one you'll definitely want to review again. Also, I noticed that Webster, who is currently enjoying retirement, has updated his Citrix scripts to add newer versions to the products lists. Well, that's it for this week's episode of the podcast. I did try out something a little bit different. I shared it on Blue Sky for anyone who follows me. But I was trying to get ChatGPT to create the script for this week's episode. So I actually took sample scripts from previous episodes that I've manually created myself, fed it to ChatGPT, and then said, hey, I want to give you links for stories that I'm interested in covering on this week's episode. Can you generate me a script? I thought maybe that would be a nice little way to transition to keeping the podcast around by making it faster and easier to do. But unfortunately, it did not work out well. It just started injecting a bunch of nonsense that was not included in the articles and not using the source material cited. So unfortunately, that did not work out very well. But something that did turn out to be somewhat useful is when I feed it the script that I create and ask it to be more concise, it seems to do that. Albeit, looking at the time right now for this episode, it's pretty close to the length of a regular episode. But I think the stories have been a little more compact, so hopefully that's something we can benefit from going forward by leveraging AI to tidy up my scripts. But that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening.